It's up to the living to keep in touch with the dead. Man's power don't end with death. Just move on to another place. A place where we go and watch over our beloved family.
Since the movie Sinners came out, I've been having the same conversation over and over. Someone will say, yeah, this was an okay vampire movie, but I was confused about why a character had this motivation. Or that they didn't understand the scene where Sammy was singing and all the spirits came out. Or why the KKK came in at the end. It seems a little gratuitous. And I sit there and I think, did we watch the same film? Because Sinners isn't hiding that it's about white supremacy. And Ryan Coogler definitely wasn't subtle about it because it's evident in every single choice he made in this movie. I get why some people miss it, and even if they did catch the message, they probably didn't catch all the ways Coogler showcases white supremacy in the movie. But once you see what Coogler's doing, you realize there's not a single moment wasted in this film. It's all building to the argument that white supremacy is an evil that infects everything it touches. So, in this video, I'm going to go over the overarching things to show how the brilliance of Sinners lies in how Coogler uses vampire mythology to create an allegory for white supremacy. I'll be painting here with broad strokes, so it won't be a 3-hour video, but maybe when you watch the movie again, you'll catch all the little things that you didn't notice before and appreciate the attention to detail. Sinners is a Black Southern Gothic horror, a period piece, and a musical. Which is crazy, I know. But understanding the main genre of Black Southern Gothic horror is crucial to seeing how Coogler structures his exploration of white supremacy. But let's start with what is Southern Gothic horror. It's a subgenre that blends the atmosphere of Southern Gothic horror literature with elements of folk horror. So that means rural, sometimes isolated communities, and a focus on folklore, superstition, and dark aspects of nature. It explores the anxieties and fears rooted in Southern culture, using really grotesque characters, unsettling landscapes, and supernatural elements to create a sense of unease. And in Sinners and other movies with the same genre, it delves into the darker aspects of Southern history, namely the society and identity, often exploring themes of racism, religion, abuse, all through a lens of magical realism. You've seen this before probably in films like Eve's Bayou, which is less of a horror but has elements that focus on the supernatural and abuse, The Skeleton Key, which uses Louisiana folklore to explore racism, the supernatural, and abuses of power. Then there's Candyman, which, yes, technically isn't Southern Gothic horror, but uses a lot of the same themes. But it turns this urban legend into a commentary on racism in housing of all things, specifically against Black people. There's also Them Covenant, which if you haven't watched, I really suggest you do. It's such a great anthology show, and it takes 1950s suburban racism and then makes it supernatural. And in literature, you can see things like Toni Morrison's Beloved, Octavia Butler's Kindred, and then my favorite personally is P. Djèlí Clark's Ringshot, which takes the KKK and turns them into literal monsters. I highly recommend this book. What all these works understand and what Coogler taps into with Sinners is that for Black communities in the South, the supernatural isn't separate from historical trauma. And pay attention to that. It will come into play later. These monsters have always been real. By placing his vampire story within this tradition, Coogler is using this genre that's always been about making invisible systems of evil visible and turning it into something you can actually confront. So he made vampires an allegory for white supremacy. Before we dive into how Coogler uses vampires to represent white supremacy, we need to understand what white supremacy actually is. White supremacy is a system that centers whiteness, the concept, as the default, the norm, the ideal, that everything else gets measured against. This hierarchy places white people at the top and everyone else in descending order based on their proximity to whiteness. But white supremacy is directly tied to capitalism. Whiteness gets linked to wealth, while Blackness, the concept, gets linked to poverty. And everyone in America is fighting to be closer to whiteness and wealth, even though this system is a false construct, created to really benefit the few at the very top. These people sacrifice all of us for their wealth and trick the have-nots, which definitely includes poor and middle-class whites, into thinking that the real issue is race. While everyone's squabbling about the politics of being as far away from Blackness as they can, their resources, wealth, and even bodies are being extracted for all they can to support the ones at the top. The thing about systems of oppression is that they don't just hurt the people at the very bottom. They consume everyone who participates in them, including the people who think they're benefiting from it. White supremacy spreads like an infection that gets into communities, and it changes how people think, how they see themselves, and how they see others. Once you're infected by this ideology, you start seeing other humans as being less than human. You start justifying violence against them to hope to reduce the violence against yourself, which is why vampirism is a perfect allegory for white supremacy. It leaves no one untouched. And even if you are the blood-sucking bastard you're trying to move away from, you move away from your humanity, and you are a loser in this system too. You become a predator, and you have to feed off of others to survive. Now we get into the movie proper, and I first want to start with something that I'm calling the hierarchy of infection. In this movie, who gets turned follows a specific pattern that matches how the racial caste system works in America. Let's start from the very top. The white couple's transformation. Notice how Remmick does not need to compel them much. They willingly allow him in once they think he's in danger from the natives. They don't suspect that he's lying to them because they would willingly trust a white person over any person of color, even if they're being warned against it. I also noticed that because they were turned so quickly, it kind of mirrors how people in positions of privilege accept the status quo with little resistance. This is a direct juxtaposition, a word you're probably going to hear a lot in this video, with how hard Smoke and the others had to fight against the vampires, and as a result, the power of white supremacy. If they were more skeptical or just not racist, they would still be human, but because they are, they became the first to be turned. As we head to the juke joint a few scenes later, we see Mary's turning play out next. We watch how her initial confidence that she could control the situation with the group outside the juke joint crumble when Remmick turns his attention to her. She thought her proximity to whiteness as a white-passing mixed woman would save her, as most white women tend to, but that turned out to be a gross miscalculation. Cornbread's turning is next, and his was interesting because of what he stands for. Cornbread is technically a black man with a lighter complexion, or he's mixed. I'm not entirely sure, but you can definitely tell he's black and something else. And if we were to go back some years in history, this would have benefited him greatly. Someone of Cornbread's color, if he were enslaved, would give him benefits that someone of Smoke, Stack, Sammy, Annie, or Delta Slim's complexion would not have. That colorism is still prevalent today. As we can see in many fields, lighter-skinned black people tend to get more opportunities over darker-skinned counterparts. Cornbread also was the one that let Mary back into the party where she turned Stack. But that, to me, is indicative of how Cornbread didn't even really question why Mary would ask to be let back in, because he wants to be seen as good at his job and would never disrespect somebody who has more proximity to whiteness than him. I'm going to skip along to Grace's betrayal, because unlike the others, she wasn't turned because she walked outside or happened upon a vampire. Instead, she knew the risk for her and everyone else involved and acted out of spite and selfishness. This part of the movie irked me and many other black people because it rings true to the fact that in a lot of ways, POC solidarity is a myth. If given the opportunity to do better for all POC or to get the chance to get proximity to whiteness, non-black POC will often choose the latter. I think the most recent example of this playing out in real life is when affirmative action was repealed. Over the last decade, many Asian Americans thought elite institutions used affirmative action to harm them. They contended that eliminating affirmative action would eliminate a racial barrier to Asian Americans' entry into highly prestigious schools prior to the 2023 Supreme Court rulings. Many Asian Americans felt that the diverse college admissions prioritized Blacks, Latinx, and Native American candidates. Recent enrollment figures from the last year following the Supreme Court's judgment show the exact opposite. According to these enrollment figures, Black, Latinx, and Asian students are losing ground, while white students are gaining. So it is actively harming them. But if they think for a second that they can get a leg up over people they might deem lesser, sometimes they will. Delta Slim. And his sacrifice was particularly sad because he almost felt expendable, like he was set up to die, or a martyr, like most black people are in the system. Delta Slim didn't bother anyone, and he stuck to himself. He sacrificed himself to the greater good when the opportunity presented himself. A noble sacrifice, if you will. But I can't help feeling like he kind of was just cannon fodder. I'll stop here for now because this gives you a good grasp of how the system works in this movie, and I want to circle back to one of the victims of white supremacy that many didn't notice, and that was Remmick. In the movie, Remmick sings the song A Rocky Road to Dublin. It's a 19th century Irish folk song written by D.K. Gavan about a young Irishman traveling from Tuam in County Galway to seek his fortune in Dublin. The song describes the troubles that the protagonist encounters on his travels, with the protagonist saying that he's off to reap the corn, meaning he's off to seek his fortune. It's a song about economic migration and about leaving home because you have to, not because you want to. And that's important because we have to remember that the Irish weren't always considered white in America. Irish Catholic immigrants faced significant hostility from the predominantly white Protestant society between 1820 and 1920, which led to the emergence of negative stereotypes portraying them as violent drunks. Employers discriminated against Irish immigrants with Nina or no Irish need apply signs, and an anti-Irish sentiment found in 19th century Britain and America was the norm. They were seen as inferior and not quite white. But someone had to turn Remmick, right? He didn't become this vessel of white supremacy on his own. His transformation can be read as how marginalized white groups historically gained acceptance by participating in the oppression of others, particularly Black Americans. The Irish learned that the path to whiteness in America meant stepping on Black people. And we see how this plays out historically. During the Great Migration, when millions of Black Americans moved from the South to northern cities in the early 20th century seeking better opportunities, they often found themselves in direct competition with Irish communities who had been there longer and were trying to secure their own place in the hierarchy. If we go back some decades to 1863, in New York during the draft riots, more than 100 people were murdered by an angry mob, with enrollment officers and free African Americans targeted for violence. But the most brutal example of this is the Chicago race riot in 1919. From July 27 to August 3, 1919, dozens were killed and over 500 injured. Working class gangs from predominantly Irish neighborhoods policed racial boundaries by chasing and killing African Americans simply for setting foot on the white turf. The riot was triggered when Black youth swimming in Lake Michigan drifted into an area tacitly reserved for white people. He was stoned by a white man on the shore and drowned. The racial tensions in the city had been simmering for years as a result of the influx of African Americans because of the Great Migration. And who was leading the charge? Irish Americans who had learned that the way to secure their whiteness was to violently exclude Black people from opportunities. This connects directly to the line from the movie, "Chicago ain't nothing but Mississippi with tall buildings." Smoke and Stack came to Mississippi because they realized the North wasn't the promised land that they thought it would be. The white supremacy was no different in the North than it was in the South. The wildest part to me is that Chicago is still considered one of the most segregated cities in America. So when Remmick sings The Rocky Road to Dublin, he's connecting to his own history of discrimination. But he's also become the very thing that oppressed him. He's a victim who became a perpetrator. He learned that the only way to escape the bottom was to make sure someone else stayed there instead. In the movie, towards the beginning, the twins were speaking and they say this.
Shit, Cracker showing up, they already got us behind schedule. I'm thinking we just set up tonight. Open up next weekend. Nah, fuck that. It's gotta be tonight. Grand opening, start this shit with that. Or we start with a misfire. Look at that sky. That's a mighty fine day to be free, ain't it? Our own juke juke. For us and by us, just like we always wanted.
This exchange is a direct juxtaposition to Stack's life after being turned into a vampire. He can never be in the sun again, and he's stuck in a life where he will be hiding forever. He will never be free. Sammy, choosing his guitar and his mortality, was the clear and right choice for him. Stack is a victim of white supremacy forever. And since he's been turned, think of all the times in history he's had to hide in the shadows with Mary because they couldn't really be together, because Mary looks white. And even in the 90s, when they meet Sammy again, he still wouldn't be free because interracial relationships weren't the norm. Being able to face the sun and be in the light means you're free. And in the sense of capitalism, them owning a juke joint, that meant they were financially free. Being a vampire means that you are a slave, and specifically a slave to white supremacy. No longer able to access the means to provide for yourself on your own terms. The end credit scene and its importance for Stack, Sammy, and Mary reinforces that the cycle continues. Even decades later, they're still trapped in this existence, still unable to truly live free. But worse is that they think they are. While Sammy, who gets to choose his humanity, gets to live and die on his own terms. A complaint I kept seeing from people is that the KKK subplot felt forced and ham-fisted, but I thought it made perfect sense. That final sequence where Smoke defeats the vampires only to immediately face the KKK the next morning wasn't just tacked on drama. It's literally the entire point of the film. Once they fought the supernatural evil, he had to then deal with the real and present evil, right? The vampires were just a metaphor, but the KKK is the literal manifestation of white supremacy. Coogler is showing us that no matter how hard you try, every facet of this system is controlled by the monsters. But these monsters just aren't supernatural. They're also human. They're real. They're your neighbors. They're the people that you can see on the street. They're people you interact with on a day-to-day basis who smile in your face and behind your back secretly hate you. And it's the system itself. Every single part of it is infested by this disease of white supremacy. So, once Smoke realized that it would never truly end for him, he would still have to live in a world where the evil of whiteness is inescapable. Death became the only real freedom available to him. Smoke's decision to remove his mojo bag and accept death meant that he gets to escape on his own terms and be with his family. Because in death, he is truly free. And that's the tragic realization of sinners and what Coogler wants us to confront. For Black people in the system, true freedom only often comes in death. And I don't mean just literal death, also death of upholding the system. It's connecting with our ancestors and connecting with this understanding that the system was never designed to let us win. You can fight the vampires, you can win that battle, but there's always going to be another wave of evil waiting. The KKK showing up right after Smoke's victory. If you don't understand that, could seem like bad writing, but it's the most honest part of the movie to me, and one of the most honest things that Coogler could have done. The reason why it was important also is that you have to consider that Smoke spent the majority of the movie being mad that he couldn't participate in capitalism the way he wanted to. Mad that his patrons, which were Black people, were poor. Mad that they were paying in worthless Maybelline money. Mad that this venture wasn't going to be profitable. His death meant an upholding of this system also died.
Listen, I got money, huh?
And also you can look at it when Sammy left the church at the end and he left with his broken guitar. That was the death of the ideology of the church for him. He understood that that church became a tool that subjugated people for millennia and subjugated him as well. So he chose his guitar and his connection to something outside of himself. And with that, white supremacy that came through his father and the church and Remmick died. The next thing I want to break down is looking at Coogler's argument about white supremacy versus having authentic cultural connections and how he shows this in the film. Let's look at the church that we see at the beginning of the movie. It's a stark white church. Everything about it feels intentionally oppressive and sterile. Those stark white walls, Sammy's father ruling from his elevated pulpit like some plantation overseer. The hierarchy is very clear that there is one man who speaks and everyone else obeys. Coogler uses that scene to showcase the patriarchal sense of the church, and also when you see Remmick recite the Lord's Prayer, it's also showing that he, as the patriarch, has the power of the vampires. He shouldn't be able to wield these holy words without consequence, but he can because the tool of evil and the tool of white supremacy is also religion. And that's why Sammy never felt protected by the religion. It was just another tool of evil that the white supremacist system gets to appropriate. This makes Annie's Hoodoo shop all the more radical as a counterpoint. One thing I noticed is that Coogler refuses to exoticize it. There's no spooky music or weird camera angles. Instead, we see life happening. This matters because Hollywood has spent centuries demonizing Black spiritual practices, but here they're shown as what they truly are, as a basic natural tradition. Annie's shop felt like a holistic representation of what Hoodoo is, and that it's a practice full of life. You can see that in the kids coming into the shop and laughing. You can see that in the love between Annie and Smoke. You can even see that in the sex scene. And you can even see that in death from the form of their child being right outside of the shop. It's all a part of the natural cycle of life. Spiritual practices aren't divorced from that. They're not complicated. They're easy enough for the children who are coming into the shop to understand. And they're about understanding your place in the world and having a connection to your ancestors and the people who came before and everything that came before, and how to live in harmony with that, with your nature and with spirit or the greater spirits above you. Then we get Sammy's guitar scene at Club Juke, where something very magical happens. The music summons the spirits of past and future and ancestors and musicians from different eras and relatives of the people all into the juke joint. And it's all captured in this incredible single tracking shot that blends different musical styles and time periods seamlessly. What's really beautiful about this scene is how the music elevates everything. The roof of the club catches on fire, and that symbolizes, to me at least, the burning away of the veil between life and death. The scene also showcases how everyone gets to be the version of themselves that they want to be, coming in as they are in that moment. Now compare that to Remmick's scene, where we see that Remmick comes in singing the Rocky Road to Dublin. Everyone was uniform and singing along to the same thing. And it felt hollow and it felt mechanical. And there was no soul, no individual expression. Even though the people seemed like they were having fun and laughing, they really were mind controlled, which is why Remmick so desperately wants Sammy's power. He sees the strength and he sees that that power can bring people together. While Sammy does it for good, and Remmick wants to do it, obviously, for his insidious motives. That true liberation comes through reconnection, and that's the real victory the film offers. We get to see a path forward that is returning to the wisdom of our ancestors that we always knew. Showcase that by talking briefly about the medicine wheel from indigenous North American traditions and the Bakongo cosmogram from Central Africa. While doing my research for this video and looking at different things in history and obviously some practices in Hoodoo, I stumbled upon this similarity that I noticed. And it was actually just so cool. So I wanted to share it with you all about these two spiritual frameworks that were created completely independently of one another, thousands of miles apart, but so similar in the functions and tools for how to live in accordance with nature, spirit, and with yourself. The medicine wheel is used by Native Americans, and it's provided people the way to orient themselves in both traditional belief and systems according to seasonal change in their areas. It was about improving the survivability as well. The wheel tool that's able to showcase the continuity and perpetuity of all life. The Bakongo cosmogram similarly shows the cycle of life and death. It also shows the connection between the physical and spiritual worlds. Many of these cosmograms were found under plantations drawn by the enslaved people who lived there, bringing over their traditions and beliefs from their home. The wisdom shared in these cosmograms is vital to the history and practices in Hoodoo and in Native American spirituality. The thing that I found really cool is that academics are actually recognizing this wisdom now. There's recent research by Dr. Tammy Greer and Dr. Jennifer Lomax from the University of Southern Mississippi looking at how the medicine wheel can encourage more comprehensive lifestyle intervention components with traditional knowledge systems of the Native Americans. Even though they're specifically talking about diabetes prevention and management for Choctaw people in Mississippi, they argue that the medicine wheel as a symbol of balance and connectedness can be a useful framework to help improve the health of others. So they're building on Western practices and mixing them with often overlooked spiritual aspects, like healing and connecting with community, connecting with oneself and their ancestors as a way to truly heal. Again, I just think this is really cool. I like that this research is being done to see how effective this could be using these frameworks and help have people reconnect with things that they were intentionally divorced from because of white supremacy. Circling back to the movie, these are the ideas that Coogler shares. He wants us to get back to our ancestors. He wants us to get back to the things that we understood before. We were all swallowed up by the systems put in place to eradicate our heritage. And here's the thing. We have more in common than we have not in common. Whether you're looking at African spiritual practices, indigenous Native American traditions, or even pre-Christian European paganism, they all understand that spirituality should be connected to daily life, to our community, and to the natural world. One of the inspirations in Sinners is the legend of Robert Johnson, the man that Sammy is based on. He's a blues musician that's said to have made a deal with the devil at the Crossroads so he'd be able to master the guitar. Most people say that, yeah, he sold his soul to the devil, but if you know anything about Hoodoo, that doesn't make any sense. In Hoodoo, the crossroads are where the spiritual and physical worlds meet, and the being who rules the space is often called the man at the crossroads. He's a powerful spirit and he has a very big job, and he acts as a messenger and communicator between the realms, this one and the next. He is not the devil. He can be a trickster, and that plays a part into why his image has changed over time. The man at the crossroads shares strong similarities with Papa Legba in Voodoo, Exu in Candabole, and Elegua in Santeria. Over time, especially during slavery, enslaved Africans were told by Protestant slaveholders that these spirits were evil, and they weren't allowed to openly practice their traditions. So, many of the spirits were syncretized or blended with Christian figures to keep them under the radar. That's how the man at the crossroads became mislabeled as the devil. What Sinners does so well is that it undoes that narrative that Hoodoo is evil. Instead, it treats Hoodoo as a natural part of everyday life and an important part of Black American culture and history. When Sammy picks up his guitar, he is connecting with his ancestors, and that display we got to see in the juke joint is one of the highest forms of ancestor veneration, and how beautiful it looks when you tap into that. More proof that the Crossroads aren't evil, look at Bone Thugs and Harmony's The Crossroads music video. If the Crossroads are bad, why are they wanting to meet at the Crossroads? In the video, the guy isn't the devil, but he is the man at the crossroads. The person who is protecting and communicating between the planes of existence, this one and beyond. And he's there to guide, not to damn them. Ryan Coogler said that this movie was to connect with his lineage and heritage as being a Black person in America, especially his Southern roots. And I think he did an amazing job at doing that. You get to see the truth about these spiritual practices. They are not demonized by the same system that enslaved our ancestors, not just your ancestors in America, but also my ancestors in Africa. The crossroads aren't where you lose your soul. They're where you can meet and communicate with the people in the other realm. And I like that Coogler showcased that and showed how for centuries that this was a lie by white supremacy to tell us the story of ourselves. And I like that he's able to have a hand in rewriting that. There's this story about the Leonid meteors that happened in November of 1833. Though apocryphal, some have said that the Leonid meteor shower lit up the night sky over the south, and it freaked everyone out. The meteors were falling fast and burning up as they hit the air. They fell for days. People thought the world was ending. In Maury County, Tennessee, a little girl named Amanda Young got woken up by all this yelling. She and everybody else rushed outside, looking up at the sky, just stunned by these meteors falling so close. Some people screaming, others were praying their hearts out. But then something weird happened. The slaveholders just started talking to the enslaved people, telling them stuff that they'd never shared before. They were telling them where their family members were, who they'd been sold to, information they'd been keeping secret for years. For a lot of people, it was literally the first time they heard anything about what happened to their loved ones. Amanda remembered that night for her whole life. It stayed with her because just for a moment, it felt like the world could actually change. If you can imagine it just for a second, these enslaved people looked up and saw something that made them think, maybe there is a God, maybe there is change coming. When confronted with the truth of their behavior by what they thought as a divine force, the slaveholders began to do better. People know what's right from wrong, but only do right when they have no choice. And I think that's the final message that Coogler was trying to share. Why wait for a divine intervention? Sinners ask of us, why not choose the right path now when you have the choice? Why not connect with others now? Why not learn about the past now to create a better future for us all? Why not live in harmony with all the aspects of our existence? It can't be impossible if in some way it existed before. The ones that came before us had an inkling of what that could look like. And we have so many tools at our disposal to create ours and their preferred future. Just like Sammy chose his path, it may not be perfect, but it's got to be better than this.